Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The scent of lilies hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the even heavier weight pressing down on John's chest. He stood in the receiving line, a somber figure in a sea of black suits and hushed condolences. Each handshake, each whispered, "I'm so sorry for your loss," felt like another twist of the knife. His parents, the pillars of his life, were gone, taken too soon in a cruel twist of fate. Their absence left a gaping hole, not just in his heart, but in the world around him. He watched as Emily, his wife, moved through the crowd with an unsettling grace. Her usual warmth was replaced by a distant, almost calculated demeanor. While her eyes were dry, John's own were red-rimmed, threatening to spill over at any moment. He understood that grief manifested in different ways, but her detachment struck a discordant note. There was a certain detachment in her eyes, a lack of the shared sorrow that he craved. It was as if she were a spectator at someone else's tragedy, not a participant in her own husband's grief. As the day wore on, a different facet of Emily's grief, or lack thereof, became apparent. She engaged in conversations with family lawyers and board members, her voice hushed but her tone assertive. There was an eagerness in her questions about the family business, a sharp glint in her eyes that had nothing to do with tears. She spoke of the future of the company, her words laced with an ambition that felt jarringly out of place amidst the mourning. John had always known Emily to be driven, but this felt different. It wasn't the supportive encouragement he was used to. It was a grasping, almost predatory interest in the company he was now set to inherit. A knot of unease began to form in his stomach. He tried to dismiss it, attributing it to the stress of the day, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings he couldn't quite ignore. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, funeral arrangements, and the daunting task of sifting through his parents' belongings. John found solace in the familiar scent of leather and shoe polish that permeated his father's old office. The family business, a shoe empire built from the ground up, was now his responsibility. The company, valued at a staggering $150 million, was more than just a business. It was a legacy, a testament to his parents' hard work and dedication. He felt the weight of their expectations, the hopes they had pinned on him. He was determined to honor their memory, to steer the company towards a future that would make them proud. The company was to be the cornerstone of his family's future, a source of stability and prosperity for generations to come. As he delved deeper into the company's operations, Emily's behavior became increasingly perplexing. She, who had previously shown little interest in the intricacies of the shoe industry, now expressed a fervent desire to be involved. She offered to help, to ease his burden, but her offers felt less like support and more like an attempt to seize control. It wasn't just the offers. It was the way she carried herself, the subtle shift in her demeanor when company matters were discussed. Her eyes would light up, her voice would take on a new intensity, and a calculating glint would appear in her gaze. She started attending meetings uninvited, interjecting with suggestions that seemed more focused on consolidating power than on genuine concern for the company's well-being. John, still reeling from the loss of his parents, initially welcomed her involvement. He saw it as a sign of her support, a way for them to navigate this new chapter together. He was grateful for her willingness to share the load, to help him shoulder the immense responsibility that had suddenly fallen upon him. He loved her, trusted her implicitly. He attributed her sudden interest in the company to a desire to be closer to him, to share in this significant part of his life. He dismissed the growing unease in his gut as paranoia, a byproduct of his grief-stricken state. Then came the day that shattered his illusions. John walked into his father's office, now his own, ready to start another day of grappling with the complexities of running a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He was mentally preparing himself for a meeting with the head of marketing, brainstorming ideas for a new campaign to boost sales. But as he reached for the doorknob, he heard voices inside. One was a low murmur he didn't recognize. The other, chillingly familiar, was Emily's. He pushed the door open, his heart pounding in his chest. The scene before him was like something out of a bad dream. Emily sat in his father's, no, his chair, behind the imposing mahogany desk that had always symbolized authority and leadership within the company. She was leaning back, a smug expression on her face, talking on the phone. She looked up, startled, and quickly ended the call. Her eyes, usually so warm and inviting, were cold, almost reptilian. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice devoid of any affection, any hint of the woman he thought he knew. "This is my office," John replied, his voice trembling slightly, a mixture of confusion and dawning horror washing over him. "What are you doing here?" Emily stood up, her movements deliberate and calculated. She walked around the desk, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and stood before him, her gaze unwavering. "Not anymore," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "As of this morning, I am the CEO of this company." John stared at her, speechless, his mind struggling to comprehend the words that had just been thrown at him like daggers. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine, a premonition of the betrayal that was about to unfold. She continued, her voice hardening with each word. "I've had the board amend the bylaws. It was surprisingly easy. They seem to agree that you're in no state to run this company, not after everything." She gestured vaguely, a dismissive wave of her hand that encompassed the recent tragedy, his grief, his vulnerability. John felt a surge of anger, but he quickly suppressed it. He needed to understand, to get to the bottom of this madness. "Emily, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" She let out a humorless laugh, a chilling sound that echoed in the silent office. "Why? Because I can. Because this company is worth millions, and I'm not about to let you squander it all on some misguided sense of sentimentality." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, her movements sharp and precise. "And if you have a problem with that," she continued, sliding the papers across the desk towards him, "here's your divorce agreement. It's quite generous, considering. I'm sure you'll find it more than satisfactory." John stared at the documents, the legal jargon swimming before his eyes. He didn't need to read them to know what they meant. His marriage, his life, everything he had built with Emily was crumbling before his very eyes. He looked up at her, searching for any trace of the woman he loved, but found only a stranger staring back at him. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, a detachment from the unfolding drama. His mind, usually clouded by grief, was suddenly sharp, focused. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and he was no longer the grieving widower, but a strategist, a man preparing for battle. He looked at Emily, at the cold determination in her eyes, and a faint smile touched his lips. He said nothing. He didn't need to. It was a silent acknowledgement, a subtle declaration of war. The faint smile that had touched John's lips during his confrontation with Emily lingered, a mask hiding the turmoil within. He picked up the divorce papers, their weight in his hand feeling insignificant compared to the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. He leafed through them casually, as if merely browsing a magazine. But his mind was racing, analyzing, piecing together the fragments of Emily's deception. He exited the office and returned to his own down the hall. He had to acknowledge, albeit grudgingly, that Emily had played her hand well. She had exploited his grief, using his vulnerability as a smokescreen to seize control of the company. But beneath the anger and hurt, a new emotion began to surface: determination. He wouldn't let her win, not without a fight. He had more than just his personal feelings at stake. He had his parents' legacy, the future of the company, and the livelihoods of its employees to consider. Over the next few days, John meticulously reviewed the company's recent activities, searching for clues, for any sign of Emily's true motives. He discovered a series of suspicious transactions, transfers of large sums of money to offshore accounts, contracts signed with unfamiliar vendors, all bearing Emily's signature. Each discovery was like a punch to the gut, confirming his worst fears. His wife, the woman he had trusted implicitly, was systematically dismantling his family's legacy, piece by piece. He became aware of a growing distance between them, a chasm that seemed to widen with each passing day. There were no more shared meals, no more casual conversations, no more of the easy intimacy that had once defined their relationship. Their interactions were reduced to curt nods and strained silences. He noticed that she began to take late-night calls, her voice hushed and urgent as she paced back and forth in her study, the door firmly closed. When questioned, she would dismiss it as work-related stress, but the secrecy and the furtive glances she darted his way told a different story. Driven by a need to understand the depth of her betrayal, John made a decision that went against his every instinct. He hired a private investigator, a man named Frank, recommended for his discretion and effectiveness. He instructed Frank to investigate Emily's activities, to track her movements, to uncover the truth behind her sudden transformation. He emphasized the need for concrete evidence, legally obtained, that could withstand scrutiny in a court of law. He wanted to expose Emily's treachery, but he would do it the right way, without resorting to underhanded tactics. "I need you to find out everything you can about my wife's recent activities," John had told Frank, his voice heavy with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Her associates, her financial dealings, everything. But it has to be legal, Frank. Everything by the book. I don't want any of this to come back to bite me later." Frank, a seasoned investigator with a network of contacts and a keen eye for detail, nodded. "Don't worry, Mr. Hamilton. I understand the stakes. We'll get you the evidence you need, and it will be airtight." The following weeks were a tense waiting game. John went through the motions of his daily routine, attending meetings, reviewing reports, but his mind was constantly elsewhere, replaying conversations with Emily, searching for clues he might have missed. He found himself analyzing every interaction, every gesture, every word, searching for the moment when the woman he loved had become a stranger. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the signs had been there all along, subtle hints of her ambition, her growing interest in the company, her increasing detachment from him. He had simply chosen to ignore them, blinded by love and trust. Frank worked in the shadows, meticulously gathering information, piecing together the puzzle of Emily's double life. He followed her to discreet meetings at upscale restaurants, to late-night rendezvous at a luxurious penthouse apartment overlooking the city. He discovered that Emily was frequently meeting with a man named Richard, a venture capitalist known for his aggressive takeovers and ruthless business tactics. Richard was a shark, a predator who circled struggling companies, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He had a reputation for asset stripping, for buying companies at a bargain price and then selling off their assets for a quick profit, leaving behind a trail of broken dreams and unemployed workers. Through surveillance and discreet inquiries, Frank uncovered a web of deceit that went far deeper than John could have ever imagined. He obtained photographs, recordings of conversations, and financial documents that painted a damning picture of Emily's treachery. He found evidence that Emily and Richard had been having an affair for months, a clandestine relationship fueled by greed and ambition. Their conversations, captured on hidden microphones, revealed a chilling plot to take over Hamilton's shoes, to bleed the company dry, and then sell off its assets for personal gain. It became clear that Richard was the mastermind behind the scheme, using Emily as a pawn to gain access to the company's inner workings. He had manipulated her, played on her ambition, and convinced her to betray her husband and her family. One evening, Frank delivered a particularly damning piece of evidence, a series of text messages between Emily and Richard, outlining their plan in detail. The messages were explicit, leaving no room for doubt about their intentions. They discussed manipulating the board, fabricating financial reports, and even talked about what they would do after they sold off the company. John's reaction to the initial batch of evidence was one of controlled fury. He had suspected Emily's infidelity, but the depth of her betrayal, the calculated way she had plotted to destroy his family's legacy, was staggering. He felt a deep sense of violation, not just of his marriage, but of his trust, his love, everything he held dear. The messages confirmed John's worst suspicions. Emily wasn't just having an affair. She was actively working to destroy everything he held dear. He read through the transcripts, his hands trembling, his heart pounding in his chest. Each word was like a blow, a testament to the depth of her deception. But amidst the anger and hurt, a new resolve began to harden within him. He wouldn't let them win. He would fight back, not just for himself, but for his parents, for the company, and for everyone whose livelihood depended on it. He wouldn't allow his parents' legacy to be tarnished by their greed. He had been passive for too long, blinded by grief and denial. Now, it was time to act. He thanked Frank for his work, assuring him that he would handle the situation from here. He stressed the importance of obtaining all evidence legally, reminding Frank that they needed to be able to use it in court if necessary. "This is more than just a marital dispute, Frank," John said, his voice low and determined. "This is about saving my family's legacy. We need to do this right." He spent the next few days meticulously planning his next move. He knew he couldn't simply confront Emily with the evidence. She was too cunning, too deeply entrenched in her web of lies. He needed a strategy, a way to expose her treachery without giving her a chance to retaliate. He had to think like a chess player, anticipating her moves, planning several steps ahead. He decided to use their own tactics against them. He would create a web of misinformation, of fabricated evidence, designed to sow discord between Emily and Richard. He would turn them against each other, exploiting their greed and paranoia, until their carefully constructed alliance crumbled from within. It was a risky game, but he was willing to play it. He had nothing left to lose. John leaned back in his chair, the faint glow of the city lights painting streaks across the polished surface of his desk. The evidence Frank had gathered lay spread before him, a damning indictment of Emily's and Richard's treachery. He had spent countless hours poring over the documents, the photographs, the transcripts of their conversations, each piece of evidence a sharp reminder of the betrayal he had suffered. But amidst the pain and anger, a sense of clarity had emerged. He was no longer the grieving widower, paralyzed by shock and grief. He was a man with a plan, a strategist ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. His plan was audacious, a calculated gamble that relied on his understanding of Emily's and Richard's personalities, their greed, their ambition, and their growing paranoia. He would use their own weaknesses against them, turning their alliance into a battleground of suspicion and mistrust. He would plant seeds of doubt, carefully crafted pieces of misinformation designed to fracture their relationship, to make them question each other's loyalty. It was a delicate operation, one that required precision and a deep understanding of human psychology. But John was confident. He knew Emily, perhaps better than she knew herself, and he had a growing understanding of Richard's ruthless nature. He began by creating a series of forged documents, each one meticulously designed to exploit the cracks in Emily's and Richard's alliance. For Emily, he crafted an anonymous letter, a seemingly innocuous piece of correspondence that hinted at Richard's infidelity. The letter spoke of whispered rumors, of clandestine meetings with another woman, a woman who was described as being strikingly similar to Emily herself. It was a subtle blow, designed to play on Emily's insecurities, to make her question Richard's commitment to their plan. "My dear Emily," the letter began, its tone a mix of concern and veiled warning. "I am writing to you with a heavy heart, but I feel it is my duty to inform you of certain indiscretions that have come to my attention. It has been brought to my notice that your partner, Mr. Richard, has been seen in the company of another woman, a woman who bears a striking resemblance to yourself. They have been observed at various locations, always discreet, always careful, but the whispers have begun. I urge you to be cautious, Emily. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken, especially when so much is at stake." The letter was left unsigned, delivered anonymously to Emily's private office, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. John knew that Emily, despite her outward confidence, was deeply insecure. He had seen it in the way she constantly sought validation, in her need to be the center of attention. He was betting that this letter would tap into those insecurities, creating a rift between her and Richard. For Richard, John prepared a different kind of bait, a fabricated bank statement showing a series of suspicious transactions that suggested Emily was secretly siphoning funds from their joint venture into a private account. The statement was a masterful forgery, complete with authentic-looking letterheads and transaction codes, designed to withstand even the closest scrutiny. It was a risky move, but John was confident that Richard's greed and his inherent distrust of others would make him susceptible to the deception. He had the statement delivered to Richard's office, slipped under the door in a plain, unmarked envelope. He knew that Richard, a man who prided himself on his meticulous attention to detail, would scrutinize the document, searching for any sign of foul play. The fabricated transactions were subtle, small amounts transferred over a period of time, just enough to raise suspicion without triggering an outright alarm. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Now, all John had to do was wait and watch as they began to sprout. The initial reactions were subtle, almost imperceptible. Emily became more withdrawn, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. She started questioning Richard about his whereabouts, her inquiries masked as casual conversation but laced with an undercurrent of suspicion. Richard, in turn, became more guarded, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings, as if he suspected everyone of being a potential spy. He began to scrutinize every document, every transaction, his trust in Emily slowly eroding. John observed their interactions, watching for any sign that his plan was working. He noticed the subtle changes in their behavior, the strained silences, the forced smiles, the way they avoided each other's gaze. It was like watching a carefully constructed house of cards begin to wobble, the slightest breeze threatening to bring it crashing down. To further fuel the flames of discord, John orchestrated a series of chance encounters, strategically placing himself in situations where he could subtly feed their growing paranoia. He would casually mention rumors he had overheard about Richard's dealings with other women, or drop hints about Emily's lavish spending habits, always careful to maintain a facade of innocence and concern. He made sure these encounters happened in public places, at industry events or social gatherings, where their reactions could be observed by others, adding another layer of pressure to their already strained relationship. The tension between Emily and Richard escalated rapidly. Their private meetings became more frequent, their conversations more heated. John, through his network of contacts, learned that they were arguing constantly, their voices raised in anger and accusation. The carefully constructed facade of unity was crumbling, replaced by a bitter rivalry fueled by suspicion and greed. Then came the masterstroke. John arranged for a high-profile industry gala, a lavish event attended by all the major players in the fashion world, including Emily and Richard. He knew that this would be the perfect opportunity to expose their fractured alliance to the public, to let their carefully hidden animosity spill out into the open. He orchestrated a seemingly accidental encounter between Emily and Richard near the entrance of the ballroom, ensuring that their conversation would be overheard by several influential guests. He then subtly steered the conversation towards the company, dropping hints about recent financial irregularities, knowing that this would trigger Richard's suspicions. As expected, Richard took the bait. He confronted Emily, his voice low but laced with barely suppressed fury. "What's this I hear about unauthorized transfers? Are you trying to double-cross me, Emily?" Emily, caught off guard, stammered, "I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. It's all lies, fabricated to discredit me." Their argument quickly escalated, their voices rising above the polite chatter of the other guests. They traded accusations, their carefully constructed lies unraveling before a stunned audience. The scene was a public relations disaster, a spectacle that would be talked about for months to come. It was the beginning of the end for their partnership. They were no longer allies, but bitter enemies, their shared ambition replaced by a burning desire for revenge. John watched from a distance, a faint smile playing on his lips. His plan was working perfectly. He had turned them against each other, exposing their treachery to the world. But he wasn't finished yet. He had one final card to play. He arranged for Frank to install hidden cameras and microphones in the penthouse apartment where Emily and Richard held their secret meetings, having obtained the legal authorization to do so by working with the owner of the property, presenting evidence of potential illegal activity. He knew that their next meeting would be explosive, a final confrontation where their carefully constructed lies would come crashing down. He needed to capture it all on tape, to have irrefutable proof of their sadzish and their mutual betrayal. The meeting was everything John had hoped for. Emily and Richard went at each other with unrestrained fury, their voices dripping with venom. They accused each other of treachery, of double-dealing, of trying to steal the company out from under each other. The hidden cameras captured it all, every accusation, every threat, every desperate attempt to salvage their shattered plan. "You set me up," Richard roared, his face contorted with rage. "You were planning to cut me out all along, weren't you?" "Don't be ridiculous, Richard," Emily spat back. "You're the one who's been lying, cheating, and seeing other women behind my back. I have proof." Their argument was a symphony of deceit, a testament to the corrosive power of greed and ambition. It was the final nail in the coffin of their ill-fated partnership. John had succeeded in turning them against each other, and now he had the evidence he needed to destroy them both. The boardroom of Hamilton Shoes was a picture of corporate formality, its long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs, the air thick with anticipation. John sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped in front of him. He had called an emergency meeting of the board of directors, citing the need to discuss urgent matters concerning the company's future. The room was filled with the usual attendees, the company's senior executives, legal counsel, and a handful of major shareholders. But there were two notable additions. Emily, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously around the room, and Richard, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on John with a mixture of anger and apprehension. John had spent the past few days meticulously preparing for this moment. He had reviewed the recordings from the penthouse, the damning evidence of Emily's and Richard's treachery laid bare for all to hear. He had consulted with his legal team, ensuring that every step he took was legally sound and strategically calculated. He was ready to deliver the final blow, to expose their lies and reclaim his company. He began the meeting with a calm, measured tone, outlining the company's recent performance, highlighting a few minor successes, but subtly hinting at underlying problems. He spoke of the need for transparency, for accountability, for a renewed commitment to the values that had made Hamilton Shoes a global brand. Then, he dropped the bombshell. "I have recently become aware of certain irregularities," he said, his voice hardening slightly, "irregularities that I believe have the potential to seriously damage the company's reputation and financial stability." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the board members. He saw a mixture of curiosity, concern, and in the case of Emily and Richard, sheer panic. "I am referring," he continued, his voice now sharp as a knife, "to a concerted effort by certain individuals within this company to defraud its shareholders, to manipulate its finances, and to sell off its assets for personal gain." A collective gasp filled the room. All eyes turned to Emily and Richard, who sat frozen in their seats, their faces ashen. John picked up a remote control, his hands steady, his eyes fixed on the large screen at the end of the room. "I have evidence," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "irrefutable evidence that proves the existence of this conspiracy." He pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life. The room was filled with the sound of Emily's and Richard's voices, their heated argument from the penthouse apartment playing out for all to hear. The board members listened in stunned silence as Emily and Richard accused each other of treachery, their carefully constructed lies unraveling before their very eyes. The recording was a damning indictment, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the depths of their greed and ambition. It exposed their plan to defraud the company, to manipulate the board, and to sell off its assets, leaving its employees and shareholders with nothing. As the recording played, John watched the reactions of the board members. He saw shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of outrage. He saw the realization dawning on their faces that they had been betrayed, manipulated by the very people they had trusted to lead the company. He also saw the beginning of the end for Emily and Richard. When the recording ended, a heavy silence descended upon the room. John let the silence linger, allowing the weight of the evidence to sink in. Then, he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "As you have just heard," he said, "Ms. Emily and Mr. Richard have been engaged in a conspiracy to defraud this company. They have violated their fiduciary duties, they have broken the law, and they have betrayed the trust of everyone in this room." He then presented the other evidence he had gathered, the forged documents, the fabricated bank statements, the text messages, and the photographs. He laid it all out for the board, piece by piece, building a case that was as airtight as it was damning. The board members were in an uproar. They demanded answers, they demanded justice, they demanded that Emily and Richard be held accountable for their actions. John, seeing his opportunity, moved swiftly. I am therefore proposing a motion to immediately remove Ms. Emily from her position as CEO and from the board of directors, he declared, his voice ringing with authority. I am also proposing that we freeze her company shares and launch a full investigation into her financial dealings. The motion was seconded immediately, and a vote was taken. The result was unanimous. Emily was stripped of her power, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Richard, seeing the writing on the wall, attempted to defend himself, claiming that he had been manipulated by Emily, that he was a victim of her schemes. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The board had heard enough. John then turned his attention to Richard. As for Mr. Richard, he said, his voice cold and hard, I am recommending that we sever all ties with him and his company. I am also instructing our legal team to explore all available legal options, including criminal charges, for his role in this conspiracy. Again, the board agreed unanimously. Richard was removed from the premises, his reputation in tatters, his career in ruins. But John wasn't finished. He knew that the damage caused by Emily and Richard went beyond the boardroom. Their actions had shaken the company to its core, eroding employee morale and damaging its public image. He needed to address the fallout, to reassure his employees and to restore public trust. He called a company-wide meeting, addressing all the employees of Hamilton Shoes. He spoke honestly and openly about the events of the past few weeks, acknowledging the betrayal and the damage it had caused. He then announced the successful removal of Emily and Richard and outlined his plans for the future, emphasizing his commitment to rebuilding the company, to restoring its reputation, and to ensuring its long-term success. His speech was met with thunderous applause. The employees, who had been living under a cloud of uncertainty and fear, were relieved and energized by John's decisive actions. They saw in him a leader who was willing to fight for them, to protect their interests, and to restore the values that had made Hamilton Shoes a great company. In the following days, John took further steps to repair the damage. He initiated a public relations campaign, addressing the scandal head-on and outlining the steps he was taking to prevent such a betrayal from happening again. He reached out to key stakeholders, reassuring them of the company's stability and its commitment to ethical business practices. He also made good on his promise to pursue legal action against Emily and Richard. He provided all the evidence he had gathered to the authorities, launching a formal investigation into their criminal activities. The scandal became a major news story, dominating headlines and sparking a public debate about corporate greed and the importance of ethical leadership. The media frenzy was intense. Emily and Richard were vilified in the press, their faces splashed across newspapers and television screens, their reputations destroyed. They became symbols of corporate greed, cautionary tales of what happens when ambition and avarice are allowed to run unchecked. Emily, stripped of her power and facing criminal charges, was forced to leave the country, seeking refuge in a remote corner of the world, far from the scandal she had created. She lost everything: her career, her reputation, her marriage, and her family. She was left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own treachery. Richard, facing multiple lawsuits and a lengthy prison sentence, saw his business empire crumble. His assets were seized, his companies were liquidated, and he was forced to declare bankruptcy. He became a pariah, shunned by the business community, his name synonymous with scandal and disgrace. The legal proceedings against them dragged on for months, but in the end, justice was served. Richard was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and a host of other financial crimes. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his life of luxury and privilege replaced by the harsh realities of a prison cell. Emily, though not imprisoned, faced her own form of punishment. She was forced to live in exile, her name forever tarnished by the scandal. She was a fugitive, not from the law, but from her own past, from the consequences of her actions. John did not pursue further criminal charges against her. Instead, he filed for divorce and was granted full custody of their daughter. The dust had settled, the storm had passed, and the once turbulent world of Hamilton Shoes began to find a new equilibrium. The company, though scarred by the recent scandal, was on the path to recovery, guided by John's steady hand and renewed commitment to ethical leadership. The legal battles had been fought and won. The guilty parties had faced their reckoning, and a sense of justice, though bittersweet, had been served. John, once a man adrift in a sea of grief and betrayal, had emerged stronger, more resilient, his spirit tempered by the fires of adversity. He had not only saved his family's legacy, but had also rediscovered his own strength, his own capacity for leadership, his own unwavering commitment to the values his parents had instilled in him. The weight of their absence was still a heavy burden, but he now carried it with a sense of purpose, a determination to honor their memory by building a future worthy of their sacrifice. The company was on the mend. The employees, once demoralized and uncertain, were now filled with a renewed sense of hope and loyalty. They had seen their leader fight for them, protect their interests, and emerge victorious. They rallied behind him, working tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation and restore its financial health. Their dedication was a testament to John's leadership, a reflection of the trust he had earned through his unwavering commitment to their well-being. John implemented sweeping changes, transforming the corporate culture of Hamilton Shoes. He established new oversight committees, implemented stricter financial controls, and created a more transparent and accountable system of governance. He fostered a culture of open communication, encouraging employees to voice their concerns and ideas without fear of retribution. He introduced new training programs, focusing on ethical leadership and corporate social responsibility, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. It was a new era for Hamilton Shoes, an era defined by integrity, transparency, and a commitment to doing what was right, not just what was profitable. He also made good on his promise to transform the company into a more socially responsible enterprise. He established the Hamilton Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting education and entrepreneurship in underprivileged communities. He partnered with local schools, providing scholarships and mentorship opportunities for aspiring young designers. He invested in sustainable manufacturing practices, reducing the company's environmental footprint and promoting ethical sourcing of materials. John's personal life also began to heal. The divorce from Emily had been painful, a necessary ending to a chapter of his life that had been filled with both love and betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was also a sense of liberation, a freedom from the web of lies and deceit that had ensnared him. The process had been emotionally draining, but he had emerged from it with a newfound sense of clarity and a deeper understanding of himself. He focused his energy on raising his daughter, determined to provide her with a stable and loving home. He became a constant presence in her life, attending her school events, helping her with her homework, and sharing with her the values of honesty, integrity, and compassion that his parents had taught him. He taught her the importance of family, of loyalty, of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult. He wanted her to grow up knowing that she was loved, that she was safe, and that she could always count on him. Their bond, once strained by the turmoil of the scandal, grew stronger with each passing day. They found solace in each other's company, healing together from the wounds of the past. As for Emily, she remained a distant figure, a ghost from a past he was slowly but surely leaving behind. He had chosen not to pursue further legal action against her, recognizing that her greatest punishment was the life she had created for herself, a life of exile and regret. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his own. He understood that holding on to anger and resentment would only serve to poison his own spirit. He chose instead to focus on the future, on building a better life for himself and his daughter. Richard, on the other hand, was serving his time, his life of luxury and privilege replaced by the harsh realities of prison. His appeals had been denied, his attempts to regain his freedom thwarted at every turn. He was a broken man, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his reputation. He had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of the corrosive power of greed and the inevitable consequences of unchecked ambition. Years passed. Hamilton Shoes thrived under John's leadership, becoming a model of corporate responsibility and ethical business practices. The company's profits soared, its reputation was restored, and it once again became a leader in the global fashion industry. It had not only survived the scandal but had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more respected than ever before. John, now a seasoned leader, often found himself reflecting on the events that had transformed his life. He had learned valuable lessons about trust, about betrayal, about the importance of staying true to one's values, even in the face of adversity. He had learned that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found, that resilience can be forged, and that even the most painful experiences can lead to growth and transformation. He often visited his parents' graves, seeking solace and guidance in their memory. He would tell them about the company, about his daughter, about the life he was building. He would thank them for the values they had instilled in him, the values that had guided him through the storm and brought him to a place of peace and fulfillment. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city, John sat in his office, looking out at the skyline. He was no longer the young, naive man who had inherited a company and a legacy he wasn't sure he was ready for. He was a leader, a survivor, a man who had stared into the abyss and emerged stronger. He picked up a pen and began to write a letter to his daughter. He wanted to share with her the lessons he had learned, the wisdom he had gained from his experiences. He wanted her to understand the importance of integrity, of loyalty, of the enduring power of family. "My dearest daughter," he wrote, "life is a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns, with moments of joy and sorrow, with triumphs and setbacks. You will face challenges that will test your strength, your courage, and your character. There will be times when you will be tempted to take the easy path, to compromise your values for personal gain. But I urge you, my dear, to always stay true to yourself, to the principles that guide you, to the values that define who you are. I have learned, through painful experience, that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, that trust can be broken, and that the people we love can sometimes hurt us the most. But I have also learned that forgiveness is possible, that healing can be found, and that even the deepest wounds can eventually mend. The pain of betrayal is a heavy burden to bear, but it is a burden that can be lightened by the power of forgiveness, by the willingness to let go of anger and resentment. Remember, my dear, that true wealth is not measured in dollars and cents, but in the strength of your character, the depth of your compassion, and the quality of your relationships. Cherish the people you love, hold them close, and never take them for granted. And always remember that the most important legacy you will leave behind is not the money you make, but the impact you have on the lives of others. The cost of betrayal, he wrote, his hand trembling slightly as he recalled the pain of the past, is often far greater than we can ever imagine. It can shatter lives, destroy relationships, and leave scars that may never fully heal. But from the ashes of betrayal, new beginnings can emerge. Strength can be found in the face of adversity, and resilience can be forged in the fires of hardship. Always remember, my daughter, that you are stronger than you think, that you are capable of overcoming any obstacle, and that you are loved more than words can say. And never forget the lessons I have learned. That loyalty is a precious gift, that trust is earned, not given, and that the true measure of a person's character is not how they behave when things are easy, but how they respond when faced with the greatest of challenges. He signed the letter, "With all my love, your father." He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. He knew that one day, his daughter would read these words, and he hoped that they would provide her with some small measure of guidance, some comfort, some understanding of the complexities of life, love, and loss. He hoped that she would learn from his mistakes, that she would find her own path, and that she would always remember the importance of staying true to herself, no matter what challenges life might throw her way. As he looked out at the city lights, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this place. He had lost much, but he had gained even more. He had found his strength, his purpose, and a deeper understanding of the true meaning of life. And as he looked towards the future, he knew that he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the wisdom of his experiences and the unwavering love for his daughter. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. John Hamilton was no longer just a man who had inherited a legacy. He was a man who had created his own. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.